Tilea's Troubles, Part 150, To Pay the Toll, A Battle Report. Chapter 2, The Battle. The Bridge at Casoli, early autumn, 2405. With a wave of his hand, Barone Iacopo commanded the advance to begin. His own regiment of archers moved slowly, arrows nocked, keen to loose a volley as soon as possible. Beside them, the large bodies of pikemen and knights also moved, the former aiming for the bridge, while the latter considered what role they could play if the pike were to assault first. The Petty Rosso and his band ran into the fenced yard before them, not willing to lose the opportunity to shoot at the crossbowmen, formed up on the far side of the river, and very happy to do so from behind a protectively sturdy fence. The enemy's blue and white quartered banner fluttered above them, as several heads turned to spy the halflings who had, until now, been hidden. The Petty Rosso himself was eyeing the pistoliers by the bridge, while stroking the magical ring upon his finger, wondering if he could break and scatter them with one blast of magical fire. Captain Pandolfo's galloper guns had no need to move, being perfectly able to target the bridge from where they were. Upon the far side of the mounted men-at-arms, the army's standard-bearer, Captain Gildo Pecoraro, encouraged by the wizard Pellegrino by his side, commanded the light crossbows to advance at the best pace they could manage. This put a smile on Pellegrino's face, knowing he would soon be close enough to conjure harm upon the foe. The Petty Rosso's arcane ring failed him, while Pellegrino's attempts at magic were also disappointing. He did manage to bless the main body of archers under the Barone's command with a harmonic convergence spell, but then the lightning he conjured to strike the cannon behind the wall merely struck the ground around it. Worse, in his reckless haste, he had failed to fully restrain the energies he brought into being, and a blast coursed out from him, bursting the lungs of no less than 6 of the crossbowmen by his side. Even Captain Pecoraro stumbled as he too almost choked, but he managed to keep the standard aloft. Pellegrino had to steady the captain, who was so winded and dazed that he did not hear the wizard's muttered apologies. He could not fail, however, to hear the 2 loud reports from Pandolfo's galloper guns. The first round shot skipped across the field to crash into the wooden barricade upon the bridge, tearing it to pieces. Then, after quickly shifting its aim, the second fired at the enemy pistoliers, missing them, instead striking the building behind and, unknown to the gunners, wounding the wizard within. The Petty Rosso and his rangers now felled 5 of the crossbowmen, causing the rest to flee and eliciting a cheer from the halflings. As the enemy ran, the Barone silently cursed, for they were now beyond reach of his lads' arrows, which meant the magical blessing was wasted. What with their ability to loose twice as many arrows as any other archer, he knew his lads would most likely have wiped out the Pavonans to a man. While one of the ballistae missed the fleeing crossbowmen, the other slew 2 of them. Despite this rough treatment, the surviving Pavonans rallied and reformed themselves. Perhaps they believed they were safe now, or maybe the thought of running before they had launched a single bolt shamed them, especially with their beloved lord present upon the field. On the northern side of the bridge, the halberdiers fell back a little, as ordered by the Duke himself, while the pistoliers manoeuvred around behind them, presumably having felt somewhat exposed beside the bridge, especially when an iron round-shot smashed into the building behind them. So it was that the Pavonans were concentrating just about everything they had at the bridge, where they were better concealed by the houses and best placed to thwart any attempt to cross. Their confidence waxed with proximity to their miraculously recovered master, who, despite his order to fall back a little, was a most reassuring presence. Truly, they agreed, he was Mor's most favoured, granted life so that he might defend his realm against its enemies. The Pavonan wizards, peering through the windows of the houses either side of the bridge, failed to bring about any magical harm upon the Verezzans, their spells either too weak or dispelled by the enemy wizards. The cannon felled but 1 of the mounted men-at-arms, while the little company of archers managed to kill only 1 of the halfling crossbowmen. Such a gentle mauling was entirely insufficient to dismay the Verezzans, who continued their advance, with the galloper guns moving forward some way, and the Barone's archers marching as fast as their legs could carry them. The pike regiment, however, simply shuffled a little to one side, to allow the gallopers a clear shot over the bridge. They may have been keen to assault the bridge, but having witnessed what the guns had done to the wooden defences, they were entirely happy to allow Pandolfo's brace of pocket pistols to play upon the halberdiers. Once the foe had been reduced in number, becoming both bloodied and shaken, then surely victory would prove more certain. The halfling wizards were still attempting to cause as much harm upon the foe as they could. While the Petit Rosso's attempt to launch a ball of fire from his magical ring at the halberdiers was again dispelled, Pellegrino thought to repeat his blessing of the Barone's archers. But this too was dispelled, presumably because the enemy suspected what those archers were capable of. Frustrated, and nervous considering what had happened when he had last employed the spell, he summoned a chain of lightning to strike first at the archers, killing 4, then successfully shifted the flaming shower over to the halberdiers, killing 5. "That'll do," said Captain Pecoraro at his side encouragingly. "Indeed, more of that sort of thing would be very welcome, Master Wizard." Pellegrino allowed himself a smile, which became a grin as the halfling crossbow with him brought down the last 4 of the enemy's archers. While the gallopers proved a disappointment, as their bullets only knocked 1 halberdier to the ground, the Petit Rosso's rangers made up for it by killing 4 more. As another 2 of the rallied crossbowmen were skewered by a ballista bolt, Duke Guidobaldo once more ordered the halberdiers to fall back a little further, presumably attempting to find the best spot to make a stand, perhaps where the swordsmen or pistoliers might be of some assistance in the fight. While the lesser Pavonan wizard watched as her magical ring's bound fireball failed to burn any of the rangers, her more powerful colleague was spoiled for choices when it came to targets. In the end, he decided he would go for what he presumed were the most able of the enemy's fighters, the men-at-arms. He cursed, however, for although he felt the power of the spell's bite, the enemy's armour proved impenetrable. Then, to his great satisfaction, a moment later, the Pavonan cannon felled 3 of them. The Pavonan crossbow, despite their toing and froing of earlier, had at last managed to shoot, killing 2 of Petit Rosso's band. Considering how badly they themselves had been mauled, this did not at all satisfy their desire for vengeance. The halfling crossbows, despite the gun barrel levelled in their direction, now moved bravely up to the river's edge, and on the army's other flank the Barone's archers also drew much closer to the river. The pike, meanwhile, steeled themselves and began to march quickly to the bridge, skirting around the tollkeeper's cottage. It was time for action. "This is it," thought Barone Iacopo. At long last, he was about to launch his mailed fist into Pavona's face. No more waiting, distracting, recruiting and drilling. The real fight had begun, a chance to end the threat of the Gondis and the Pavonans for good, and not just punish them for what they had done. The wizard Zita Scaduto had a smaller battle on her mind, focusing a magical wind on the crossbowmen. Wisps of ethereal energy coalesced at her command, then transformed into an altogether more mundane wind, so strong that it blew the crossbowmen several tens of yards back, causing some to roll and tumble, others to slide as they vainly fought the power directed at them. This gave her much satisfaction, although she soon became aware of the continued frustration of the archers beside her. Yet again, their chances of making pincushions of the foe had been thwarted by circumstances, specifically her. Pellegrino seemed to have realised that the Barone's archers had no target, and so this time blessed the Petit Rosso's rangers, then risked another conjuration of chain lightning. Once again he was successful, this time striking down 6 of the halberdiers, and once again he failed to keep control of the flow of energies he had conjured, and a great surge coiled about him violently, then burst to kill Captain Gildo, the army standard-bearer, and 2 more of the poor halfling crossbows with him. Despite reeling from shock and dizziness, yet still the survivors refused to run. The world seemed to spin around Pellegrino, who could not work out which hurt more, the guilt for what he had unleashed on his own comrades, or the piercing ache in his head. The Petit Rosso, however, had been blessed, not cursed by Pellegrino, and commanded his surviving rangers to loose at the halberdiers. This they did, killing another 5. The Pavonan's strongest regiment had been reduced to half strength, and had yet to cross blades with the foe. They did not complain, nor even flinch, for the Duke was with them. Instead, they were silent, calm, and clearly filled with righteous fury. As far as they were concerned, Holy Moor was on their side, and his favoured mortal servant led them. They were intent, even content, to fight to the very last. Little did they know the premonitory nature of this notion. Just then the galloper guns fired at the wall before the enemy cannon, breaking it down and leaving the crew exposed. As the bedraggled crossbowmen returned to the field of battle, Duke Guidobaldo at last ordered the halberdier regiment, what was left of it, forwards, to mount the bridge. Despite their losses, they truly believed that with the Duke at their head, there were none who could defeat them. Apart from his one-word command to advance, Guidabaldo said nothing. It was a reticence that seemed to prove his steadfast nature, as he had no need for words, only deeds. A simple gesture was all that was required for the drummer to sound the halt, just as the regiment reached the gentle crest of the bridge, before the shattered planks of the defences. Behind, the swordsmen moved up, as the pistoliers weaved their way through to regain their original position. The battle for the bridge was about to begin. Nothing came of the Pavonan wizards' attempts at magical harm, for Pellegrino and Zita used various means to bat their spells away. The gunners took their last chance to shoot at the pikemen, killing 3 with a ball that no one could bat away. Yet the Verezzans did not falter, continuing their steady approach. With a cry of vengeance for Lord Lucia, Captain Bugny now ordered the charge, and the pikemen crashed into the halberdiers. The wizard Pellegrino, despite his earlier disasters in trying to control his spell's energies, risked casting harmonic convergence upon the pikemen, successfully gifting them an unnatural edge in the fight. The pikemen could feel the blessing, the confidence and power flowing through them, and their battle cries took on a keener edge. This sound cheered Pellegrino, emboldening him to try one more spell, hurling lightning from the heavens to kill first 5 swordsmen and then 4 pistoliers. Pellegrino began to grin with satisfaction. Did this not balance the books somewhat, he thought? Indeed, if his previous blunderings had not killed Gildo and several companions, he would have danced with joy, which he'd been known to do in the past. But something nagged at him, then began to needle his already pained brain. His expression turned to horror as he realised that once more he had failed to fully harness the energies broiled up for his spell, and that a stray shard was now swirling uncontrollably, gaining worldly power with each rapid turn. Before he could speak either a warning or an apology, the spinning, ethereal intensity spewed out into the mundane world, slaying him and all but 2 of those with him. The last survivors lurched in shock, then turned to run, unsteadily, but with all the speed they could muster, away from the bridge. Barone Iacopo failed to notice, for at last, and to his great satisfaction, he and his archers were able to loose no less than 2 quick volleys at the recently returned crossbowmen across the river, killing them to a man. The Pettirosso and his rangers brought down another pistolier with their somewhat less voluminous volley, and Pandolfo's brace of light guns damaged the enemy's great cannon. In the very centre of the field of battle, upon the bridge, the critical fight had begun. Whether the Pavonans held the bridge or the Verezzans crossed it would surely decide the day's victor. Both sides had been battered, although the Pavonans had taken the lion's share of harm. If the Duke could deny the Verezzans passage, then Pavona had a fighting chance of driving off the Verezzans. The time thus bought might allow Lord Silvano to return with the realm's marching army. Or maybe the Verezzans' courage would fail then, and they would slink away with their tails between their legs, believing Pavona was not an enemy they could beat. The melee was furious, as serried rows of pike points thrust through rank after rank before the halberds' heavy blades could bring their own harm to bear. 12 Pavonans were slain by the first force of the charge, with 3 more perishing on Captain Bugny's busy blade. The Duke lopped the head off the pikeman's champion, his loyal captain slew another, and the surviving halberdiers hacked down 2 more. The thin blue and white line which remained had held the Verezzan tide in check. It seemed that with their beloved red-armoured lord amongst them, nothing could make them run. While the swordsmen steeled themselves behind, the Pavonan pistoliers trotted along the river's edge to get closer to the halfling Barone and his archers. It was a desperate move by desperate men. Perhaps these young gentlemen had decided that if their lord was to die, then they should do so too. Witnessing this boldness from the window of the smaller house, the lesser Pavonan wizard hurled a fireball using her enchanted gold ring, killing 3 of the Pettirosso's rangers and causing the rest to run from the little compound. Chuckling cruelly at the sight, the other wizard summoned another fireball using his own magic and hurled it into the Barone's archers. 8 of them were fatally and most horribly burned. In some little corner of the Barone's mind, a questioning voice contemplated the cost his wards were paying to exact his revenge on the Pavonans. But such was the hatred filling the rest of his mind that he barely noticed the calculation. The more powerful Pavonan wizard watched the Duke's fight from his window with concerned fascination. Hoping to assist his lord, he tried to cast a magical imprisonment of flame on the pikemen, but the enemy wizards thwarted his magic. While the pistoliers killed but one of the Barone's archers, and the cannon felled a single mounted man-at-arms, the Duke bore down upon Captain Bugney, cutting the brave fellow's head clean from his shoulders with a single swipe of his blade. The pikemen finished off the last of the halberdiers, so that now only Duke Guidobaldo and his own captain opposed them. And yet still they stood their ground. Unwilling to receive any further attention from the cannon, especially when their present task was simply to await an opportunity to join the fray, the Verezzan men-at-arms rode some way across the field, towards the now rallying rangers, one of whom waved at them as if to tell them, "Watch out!" The galloper guns, on the other hand, moved closer to the cannon, so that both they and the bolt-thrower could target it. Neither the Petit Rosso nor the surviving wizard Zeta Scaduto could bring any magic to bear on the foe, for the enemy was too far removed from them. But the Barone's archers were able to reach the pistoliers with their arrows, killing another 3. As if wholly resigned to their inevitable fate, the last 2 refused to flee. Much to the Verezzan's frustration, neither their gallopers or ballista could harm the cannon. But on the bridge, the pikemen managed to wound both the Duke and his captain, but did not kill either. The price paid for this was 3 more of their own lives. The taking of the bridge was proving to be as challenging as the Verezzans had feared, but the pikemen's spirits were lifted by the fact that both Pavonans had now been visibly blooded. The Pavonan wizards chose again to hurl fireballs at the Barone and his archers, this time killing 7, so disheartening those remaining that they and their lord now ran away. The Barone still wholly intended to see this battle through, but he was damned if he was going to waste his own life and that of his archers by simply standing too close to an enemy his men could not shoot. A moment later, a cage of magical fire descended upon the pikemen, killing 2 of them. Nevertheless, they fought on. 2 others thought they had surely skewered the Duke, but were magically thwarted by some blessed artifact he carried. The Pavonan captain, however, was less well protected, and finally fell, so that now Guidabaldo alone held the bridge against the pike. Yet still he did not flee. It seemed like the stuff of myth and legend, a resurrected hero facing an entire regiment of foes, unwavering as he refused to allow them to pass. Again the Petit Rosso and his band occupied the fenced yard, trying not to look at the charred corpses of their fallen comrades, while Barone Iacopo chose to put more distance between himself and the enemy wizards, having ascertained that the bridge was surely about to be taken by the pikemen, and that his mounted men-at-arms were still intact. He halted just before the outermost ballista. He had always known it would not be him who took the bridge, nor any of his kind, but he had commanded the army, arrayed them for battle, and done what he could to help. This would have to satisfy him. It was down to the fighting men of Verezzo to carry the day. The gallopers now shot at the larger house, from which they had witnessed fireballs being launched, and struck it. They could not know it, but they had hurt the wizard within, enough for him to make up his mind it was time to save himself and leave. Suddenly there was a great cheer from the pikemen, and all on the field, friend and foe, apart from the gunners whose battered ears would take some time to recover before they could discern such sounds, knew that the Duke had been cut down. With an anguished cry, the Pavonan swords now charged the pikemen, for they could think of nothing else to do. The fight was bloody, as it was bound to be, but the pike had the advantage of ground, of morale, of every one of their serried ranks able to thrust at the foe, and with the death of 6 of their own, the swordsmen's will to fight dissipated, a process catalysed by their shock and grief at the Duke's demise. They turned and fled, and in so doing, the first of the Verezzans strode onto the far side of the river. All other Pavonans now turned to run, but not before the last gunner touched a burning match to the bruised powder in the barrel's pan and sent a round shot to smash one of the gallopers, disabling it entirely. The day was won, if at considerable cost to the victors. The enemy's army had been all but wiped out, with only a handful of survivors scrabbling away from the field. Pavona now lay wide open, and Barone Iacopo took solace from the fact that substantial reinforcements were on the way, indeed were already close, so that he would have the means to continue both his chastisement of Pavona and, if necessary, to take on Lord Silvano should he return in time to interfere. When he reached the bridge, accompanied by the mounted men-at-arms, his own archers having left to tend the wounds of those fallen comrades who were yet alive, he went immediately to the red armoured corpse, for he struggled to believe it really was Guidabaldo. He was watched by a Shalian sister upon the other side of the bridge. Of course, despite being Pavonan, not one Verezzan thought to interfere with her business, as she tended to the fallen from both sides. Once he removed the Duke's helm, however, Iacopo's doubts were almost wholly washed away. It seemed the Duke's very corpse had been reanimated to walk and fight again, and if it were not Guidabaldo, then the man had a twin brother previously unknown to the world. Pikemen later reported how the Duke had fought ferociously, with long-honed skill, and Iacopo remembered hearing years before of the Duke's youthful victories in battle, fighting at the head of his army. It seemed, despite Guidabaldo's age and injuries, he had not lost his ability with a sword, nor the strength to bear it well, no doubt aided by the powers of various magical trinkets. The Barone looked up to the sky. Could his greatest enemy really be dead? And if so, then why continue this war, now that the cruel but necessary justice had been achieved? Just then, however, he wondered how young Lord Silvano would take the news, a thought that quickly led to another. Here and now, by killing the Duke, he had surely made a new enemy, just as implacable as he himself had been since Lord Lucia's death. An enemy, moreover, with the hereditary right to rule Pavona, the ardent love of his people, and all the martial abilities and pride his father had ever possessed. Despite Iacopo's earlier optimism, he realised this moment might be the start of a long and brutal war. Perhaps the only way to avoid such would be to act decisively and assiduously, to give Pavona not a moment's chance to recover and to strike its new Duke down at the very first opportunity. He did not think he had bitten off more than he could chew, but he did now wonder if it was more than he could stomach.